We are holding in the last parsha of the book of Bereshit. The last parsha of Bereshit is the name of the parsha is Vayechi. The name of the parsha is Vayechi, and the name of Vayechi means he lived, and it talks about the life and the last years of the life of Yaakov, Jacob, our forefather. As you remember correctly, last week, Jacob made his way from Canaan to the land of Israel. I'm sorry, from Canaan to Egypt. Hi, Arnold. Good to see you. He made it from Canaan to Mitzrayim, to Egypt. And now the Torah begins the story that Yaakov lived in Egypt, Vayechi, 17 years, 17 shana. And we are going to read today this parsha, the last year of Yaakov's life. He is 147 years old. He begins the parsha by having the story how he shares his blessings with Joseph's children, which is Yaakov's grandchildren, Menashe and Ephraim, a very famous story, the way he puts his right hand on Ephraim, the younger child, and his left hand on Menashe, the older child. There is an exchange between Yosef and Yaakov in regard to that occurrence. Then each one of the children is getting their blessing, and at that point, Yaakov is going to literally get ready to pass away. He passes on, and he's being very respectfully, in the most honorable way, is he being sent, escorted to Eretz Israel, who is getting buried next to his father and mother, Yitzchak and Rivka, his grandfather and grandmother, Avram and Sarah, and also next to his dear wife, Leah. At the same time, just before he passes away, he explains Yosef, the only surviving son of Rachel, what exactly took place with his mother, Rachel, and why Rachel is not buried together with the rest of the patriarchs and matriarchs in the Arata Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah, which is in Hebron. And what he tells his son is that, as Rashi explains very nicely and clearly, that was specially done by order. God was the one who asked, and he wanted Rachel to be buried, and she actually was very excited to be buried on the roadside, not in Hebron, but in Bethlehem, on the way to Hebron, even though, as he tells his son, it was a very comfortable day, the weather was perfect, there was really no issue in just continuing the extra few kilometers in carrying your mother's body to Hebron. But she wanted to be there so she can serve as a source of inspiration for the future generations. And as Rashi tells us that later, when the people of Israel made their way to the exile of the exile of Bavel, they were actually very much cared and welcomed by the people, by the fact of having their graveside there, which they were able to pray for their own welfare, and Rachel also up in heaven, listening to the outcry of her children, was communicating to God the important message of getting the kids home safely once the exile period will come to an end. So even though Rachel is not there, but it wasn't, God forbid, by any negligence or any kind of laziness or any other issues that involved Yaakov. But what I would like to talk this evening is a very important topic which is being discussed in this parsha, and this is the topic of exile and redemption, particularly the issue of the future redemption, which is also alluded and discussed in this parsha. In this parsha, we have a story. Yaakov is gathering his children. If you want to look it up, it happens on chapter 49, verse 1. So the Torah tells us just one simple verse. Vayikra Yaakov el Bonov, and Yaakov called for his sons, Vayomer, and he said the following, Hey Osfu, assemble yourselves, Ve'agid alochem, and I will tell you, Eis asher yikra eschem, that which will befall you, Be'acharis hayomim, in the end of days. So here, there's something which Yaakov is going to share with his family. A secret. He's going to tell them something which is only going to happen in the end of days. As we know that in our Torah, in the Chumash, in the Bible, which we call, what is the idea of end of days? End of days is usually referring to what? To the time of the ultimate redemption. That's what we call the end of days. And if the Torah tells us that Yaakov is looking to share with his kids that which will befall them on the end of days, so we expect to go and hear about the end of days. But yet, the following verse 2, verse 3, all the way to the end of the Parsha, you hear about wishes and blessings and rebuke and encouragement and inspiration to his children, each one individually, but there is nothing which is being said about the end of days. So what happened with that meeting? You called a meeting and you told us the agenda of the meeting. And you made it clear that the agenda of the meeting is to tell you what is going to befall you in the end of days. And yet you come to the meeting and we are all eagerly waiting to see verse after verse after verse. So what is it about the end of days? That's the biggest secret that we would have all loved to know and to hear. And yet you don't hear nothing. So we look at Rashi, and Rashi tells us something even stranger than that, seemingly. What does Rashi say? Bikesh legalois esakates. Yaakov was actually having an interest to reveal to his children the exact last end of days, which means, in other words, giving them the date when Mashiach is coming. That's what Kates means, the end of times, the end of Golus, when it's all going to come together with the coming of Mashiach. So he wants to tell them, when is it going to happen? And yet, Nistal komimenu Shechina. The Shechina, the divine presence, left them. But basically means God did not want Jacob to share this information. And God left them. Because if you can only share this information if you had God with you and you know when it's going to happen. But if God left them, then he doesn't know what to say. And he withdrew it from him, and he did not know when it is. And therefore, till the end of the Parsha, we don't know, until today, we don't know what Yaakov is going to tell us. Obviously, when you read this Rashi, the first thing that comes in mind is a very, very obvious question. What's the obvious question? From the time that Yaakov was about to tell it to his kids. Until today, which Mashiach is still not here, you know how many years passed? Over 3,300. Over 3,500. Over 3,500 years, to be correct, is what yet did not happen, or did not happen yet, because Mashiach never came yet. So I'm asking you, how good would it look for us, and what kind of inspiration can somebody get by knowing the time when Mashiach is coming the way we know it now? What do we know now? We know now that Mashiach has not come for 3,500 years since the story of Yaakov meeting his children. So if this is what we know, so you can imagine what kind of impact and inspiration and effect would we get, and would the kids of Yaakov get, knowing that it's not happening for another so many years. So what is the point? What would you gain by telling it to them? Obviously, also, Yaakov had something in mind which didn't work out. And the reason it didn't work out, because God left him. He said, okay, I'm not giving you the opportunity. When God leaves, it means the date is getting lost together with God. Okay, I don't mean lost, I mean disappears. So clearly God is telling Yaakov a message. I don't want you to tell them. The way I understand God, I can advocate for God. What the very fact that Mashiach is not here, that's what I'm advocating. That's why God did not want him to tell it to us. But I'm trying to understand Yaakov. Did he perhaps had a different date? If it's a different date, then it's not the real Mashiach. So what is the point? I'm looking on the commentaries around Rashi, which is the classic commentator that I have in my Chumash, the Mikroes Gdoiles Chumash, which has all kinds of commentaries. One of them is a great rabbi and sage who lived in Prague, and he was there exactly at the same time of Rabbi Yehuda Levi, a little more than 500 years ago. His name was Reb Shlomo Ephraim, who wrote a commentary that's printed in the books called Kli Yakar. And he says as follows. He says that what Yaakov had in mind, he says as follows. He says that, he explains why did the Shechina leave him? The Shechina left Yaakov because the very fact that people are going to know how long it takes to the coming of Mashiach, then they will obviously get kind of lazy on their job. What's the point of, of doing too many good things, knowing that the redemption is anyway not anticipated anytime soon? Give me a second. I don't have it in this. Give me 1 minute, okay? I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, sorry. So basically, they say, some commentaries say that Yaakov knew his children. He know this is tzaddikim, this is righteous kids. And he was sure that even if you are going to hear that the time is 3,000 years from now, 2,000 years from now, whenever it is, it's not going to discourage them of following Hashem's ways. But Hashem looks on them and he says, it's the one thing about your children. What about your children's children? What about the grandchildren? What about the generation who knows where? The Babylonian generation, the Polish generation. You think they're going to be okay knowing that Mashiach is not expected and they're going to be fine with that? Probably not. And that's why Hashem left them. But obviously, we all understand that concern. I don't think you have to be too smart or too wise to anticipate such a concern. To say that I don't want to tell my kids something which is only going to happen in maybe in 20 generations from now, and maybe my kids are strong and they're going to handle it, but the next generation might not handle it. You don't have to be such a genius. It's something which makes very well sense. And especially, what are you going to gain by telling him that 3,000 years from now is Mashiach coming? Is there a benefit for it? Seemingly not. So what's the point? So there is all kinds of explanations. One of the explanations which is being given is that when it comes to the very famous questions that people ask, Allah, Rabbi, when is Mashiach coming? Can you give me the date when it's going to happen? So in the Talmud, in Sanhedrin, the Talmud says there is a verse which is seemingly a very paradoxical verse, a very contradictory verse. It says that the idea of redemption and the coming of Mashiach is going to be at its appropriate, at its fixed time, and it's going to be hastened, meaning it's going to come quick. But the Talmud says, 1 second, is there a time frame for the coming of Mashiach? Is there a date on the calendar that God had recorded and called it, this is the day that Mashiach comes? Or Mashiach is something that can be hastened, it can be accomplished and even rushed before its appropriate time? Says the Gemara in Sanhedrin, yes, there is both. There is a time frame which was a fixed date on God's calendar that no later than that day will we marry the coming of Mashiach. At the same time, God allows for the people to make Mashiach come even sooner. And if you are accomplishing a world of goodness and kindness, and a person is working on himself with his generation to merit the time of redemption, then God can say, fine, today is the day. Today is the day. I don't have to wait. The day that God is recorded is only as the maximum date. But there is dates which can come prior to it. They can come today, it could have come yesterday, it could have come thousands of years ago. The fact that it didn't happen, because we didn't make it happen. But if you're worried if it's going to happen or not, it's going to happen. Because there is a date. This is what the Gemara said. And therefore, some commentaries explain that Yaakov actually had an agenda here. He had a plan. What was the plan? He told his kids, look, I can tell you when Mashiach is going to come. Obviously, the moment you're going to hear that Mashiach is going to come in 3,500 years, like it actually happened, what would be your response? What, am I crazy? I'm going to wait 3,500 years? Let me get buckled up and let me get my act together and try to make it come sooner. In other words, Yaakov knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that by telling them the time, which is the so-called fixed time, and they're going to share it with their kids and grandchildren, they're all going to tell each other, what are we waiting? We could have been Mashiach before Corona took place. And we could have had Mashiach before the Holocaust took place. We could have had Mashiach before the Inquisition took place, before the Crusades. Mashiach could have been already a long time ago, and the world would have been a perfect, good world. It didn't come because the time wasn't accomplished by us. And therefore, we only believe and know that there is going to be a time. There's going to be a time, but if we have seichel, and if we have courage, so the fact that we know that the time is not yet come, we will make it come. Why should we sit and suffer? Why should we go through trouble? Let's try to make it happen. And this is what Yaakov and he meant. Because there is this dual time frame for the Mashiach's coming, the fixed time, and the ability to bring him before its time, so that's exactly what's the point. That's exactly what Yaakov is trying to accomplish. Why is Hashem leaving him if that's the case? So the commentators say, because in this situation, the Jews were then in Egypt, were not ready to hear it. It wasn't the time to hear it. It goes even further. The same direction, but it goes a little deeper. It's actually also based on Rashi. We know that when they left Egypt, which is 200 years after the dying of Pharaoh, after the dying of Yaakov, after this Parasha, they left Egypt and they came to the sea and they crossed the sea and they offered a special song known as the Shira. In the Shira, there is very, very prophetic verses, various historical verses, and the Medrash and the Talmud and our sages and commentaries are all trying to make sense of those verses. One of the verses reads as follows: Tevi'emoi v'sito'emoi behar nachaloscha mochoin l'shiftecha po'alto Hashem migdash Hashem konenu yodecha. Here I have the Siddur, and I'm going to read you what the way it's being translated in English. The Jewish people are standing just now crossing the sea, and they talk about the fear which fell upon all the nations around them, and they sing Tipoy laleim eimosov ofachad bigdol zroyacho idmu kooven ad yaver amcho Hashem ad yavoir amzu kanisa. Okay, may terror and dread fall upon them. Okay, and it says by the great strength of your arm, let them be still a stone until your people pass over, O Lord, until your people you acquired pass over. And what's going to happen when we pass over the sea? Then it continues. You will then bring them and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, the place which you, O Lord, have made for you abode. Migdash Hashem, the sanctity which you hands, O Lord, have established. Hashem im loich lo'ilam voed. God is the Lord who reigns forever and ever. So what he's singing is, and Rashi tells it to us in Chumash, that the Jewish people were saying that if we were meritorious, meaning if we were accomplished, then the plan was that from Egypt, we are straight going to the mountain with the sanctuary which God has established in his own hands. Machon l'shiftecha pa'alta Hashem, the sanctuary for your dwelling that you, God, had created for yourself. This is not a tabernacle, a mishkan made by man. This is not a temple which is made by man, by King Solomon and King David. This is not the second temple, which was again made by man and therefore destroyed the second temple. But Mikdash Hashem, we're talking about a sanctuary which was made by God, and therefore it is eternal, never to be broken, never to be changed, never to disappear. This is what he's singing about, which means, as Rashi says, and the Zohar discusses it in more length, there was an original plan. And the plan was, we are staying through this bitter exile in Egypt. From Egypt, God takes us directly in that redemption, in that exodus to Israel. And that becomes the final redemption. That's it. Can you imagine that? No wars, no competition, no jealousy, no envy. Everything would have been done then and there, right there after leaving Egypt, receiving the Torah, and making our way to Israel and living from then and ever happy and healthy. Which means, in other words, that the ability to merit the redemption and the ultimate redemption was even when they left Egypt. And perhaps this is exactly what Yaakov is trying to tell them. Yaakov was not going to tell them that you're going to be stuck 3,500 years and then maybe get discouraged and give up on the whole program and leave and get frustrated. No. Yaakov is trying to tell them that you should know that there is the opportunity from here, Egypt, straight to the Holy Land with an eternal temple which will never be destroyed. And why does he have to tell it to them? They all knew that there is a time. They all knew that they're only going to be in Egypt 400 years and not more. But he had to tell it to them, right? Avram was already told that there is a time frame. They're not going to be stuck there forever. But they didn't know that this redemption might be the eternal and ultimate redemption. And this is what Yaakov is trying to tell them. Ketz hayomin, the end of days, means the end of days, the way it was meant to be when they all stood in a state of merit, in a state of accomplishing the coming of Mashiach. This is what some commentaries explain. But the truth is, even that explanation is a little challenging. Why? At this point, when Yaakov is speaking to them, how many more years was left until they're going to leave Egypt? 200 years. The 200 years is still left. And since how long does a person live? Usually, except Arnold, everybody lives till 120. That's the normal age. Arnold is till 180. But everybody else, everybody who's younger than 80 or 90 knows that we're going to live only till 120. Once you pass 90, then you get upgraded even to the maximum. So if you're only going to live 120, and we know that the ultimate redemption, let's say the ultimate redemption by the exodus from Egypt, is in 200 years from now. So again, doesn't excite me if I'm not going to be there. I'm not going to be a part of it. My kids are going to be there, but I was never born a little early, so I'm not going to make it. So what are you trying to get? No one is trying to discourage his children the last week before he dies. You're looking to give them some inspiration, some guidance. That's what they want to hear. That's what they're expecting to hear. And therefore, it could be even more. That since there is the ability to get the redemption to come prior of its time, right? You can make Mashiach come before its time. So Yaakov is telling them, guys, let me tell you, we're leaving Egypt, we're going to Israel. Yes, it's 200 years, but you know what? If you buckle up and you make it work, and God gets excited with your behavior, it's going to happen in your days, before the 200 years. And therefore, you're going to make it. You have to remember, two major things was already learned by the Jews who were at that time. Number one is Hashem told Avram they're going to be slaves 400 years. And they only stayed here 210 years. So we know, as it's being explained, that the difficulty of that exile accomplished what it takes 400 years into 210 years. It was so miserable and it was so difficult that Hashem said, look, the quality of this exile is a 210-year program, which is really the quality of 400 years. And therefore, they left Mitzrayim before the end of 400 years because the Egyptians overdid it, right? They overdid it. So you know that even in things which are not positive, you can count more years into less. More years can be counted into less. That's what happened with the covenant with Avram. But furthermore, right, more years can be counted into less. Sometimes you see a couple, you ask him how many years you married. They say, how many years I'm married? I'm married 50 years. 50 years? You only got, I think your wedding was only like 20 years ago. Says, yeah, but the quality of the years and what I'm going through with my wife and with my husband is already considered something which people usually takes them 50 years to go through. And we went through it into 20 years. You know, years is not necessarily a number. You can have a statistical number which has to be happening in 20 years. And then when much, much more happens in those 20 years, so what do you say? Wow, look at that. You went through an experience which it takes usually another 30 years to go through. Right? But another thing happened actually in this week, which proved the ability to change things. What happened in this week? Yaakov comes to Egypt. And when it comes to Egypt, there is the famine. And if you remember correctly, how many years was the famine meant to stand? 7 years, right? 7 years of good and then 7 years of famine. So what does the Torah tells us? And Rashi brings it in Vayigash before, in chapter 47, verse 19, Rashi brings a very crazy story. What is the crazy story? At the end of the Parsha, says Rashi, that the people of Egypt got the second year of the famine, and they say, "Oi, things are terrible. Things are terrible." And they said, "Lama nomus leinecho." Why should we perish before your very eyes? Both we by starvation and your land by becoming barren. They tell to Yosef. And then they say, buy us and our land in exchange for bread. And with our land will be safe to Paro. And we in our land will be safe to Paro. Okay? And then they say, says Rashi, at that point when they gave their land to Yosef, says Rashi, that the Nile River, it started to once again to overflow and irrigate the land, thanks to Jacob's blessing to Paro. And therefore they said, give us seed so that we may plant the crop for next year and the lives will be saved and not die. Why did they ask for crop? The verse says they were asking for seed. Why were they asking? Because suddenly when Yaakov came and he gave his big blessing to Paroi, the Nile River is functioning again, and that which was meant to be a 7-year program is now only happened into 2 years. So again, they saw in their own eyes, that years, and when somebody tells you something is going to take 5 years or 10 years or 100 years, doesn't necessarily, you're not fixated with that number. This is the story. It's not fixated with the number. Things change. Things are changing. Things are able to change. So therefore, Yaakov, by letting his kids know that leaving Egypt is going to be the ultimate redemption, which is again not as discouraging as 3,000 years later, plus the fact that you can make even the redemption come earlier by, just like you saw the famine stopped earlier, and just like you saw that the enslavement stops earlier, so too the redemption can happen earlier by your accomplishments. Therefore, he wanted to reveal them. So what's wrong? So why does God leave him? Let him, sounds like a good idea. Why shouldn't we not date? So here the Rebbe explains something very beautiful, all insight into the way redemption has to be accomplished. Yaakov looks on redemption as something which has to, once it happens, it can never change again. The redemption is meant to be complete and eternal, forever. And therefore, when Yaakov looks on the Jewish people and he says, that's the way God looks on it. And therefore, to have them hasten the redemption, and it should happen before its time, it's not going to be as complete and as perfect as the way it's being processed step by step, brick by brick, until the time has come that really Mashiach has to come. You can have a quick one. You can have a quick redemption. It could happen. You do some great things and Mashiach arrives. Hashem says, you got it, but it came too quick, and just like it say in English, something which comes quick can disappear, God forbid, quick. We want to have something which lasts forever. And for a lasting redemption, it takes time. It takes time. There is a process. Comes later in the Parsha. And Yaakov is now meeting Yehuda. He meets every child individually. They each get their words and their encouragement. Then it comes to Yehuda, and he speaks to them all kinds of interesting words. And on chapter 49, verse 10, what does Yaakov tell him? Lo yosur shevet bi-Yehuda. The scepter of regency will not depart from Yehuda. Which is that? What does it mean, the scepter? Which scepter is he talking about? So Rashi tells us, here is where Yaakov prophesizes that throughout even the Babylonian exile, when the descendants of King David are not going to serve as king, they still continue to serve as the rulers of the Jewish people. In Babylonia, there was known as the Reish Galuta, they had a title, the head of the community, which they were supported, and they were actually treated royally by the government of Babylonia. There was descendants of David. And then he said, nor will lawgivers, which means scholars, will cease from among their descendants. This is referring to the Sanhedrin, to the Jewish court, which always continues. And he says, how long will they continue? Ad kiyovai Shiloh, until the coming of Shiloh. Velo yikasamim, before whom nations will assemble. Who is this Mr. Shiloh? that is going to come. He tells them that's in the Torah this week. Yehuda is the one to be king, and the kingdom will continue all the way to the coming of Shiloh. Who is Shiloh? So Rashi tells us, you know who Shiloh is? Shiloh is the King Mashiach. And why is he called Shiloh? Shiloh means that royalty is going to be his. And it brings all kinds of interesting things if you want to hear. Even the numerical value of Shiloh is 345, which is the same numerical value as Moshe, also 345. Yavai Shiloh, coming of Shiloh, is 358, which is the same numerical value as Mashiach, which is also 358. Apparently, what it's ruled in the Rambam, and we all know it in Jewish tradition, that Mashiach is going to be a king, a descendant of King David, which is ultimately a descendant from Yehuda, right? Yehuda is the beginning of the home of David's royalty. It's all in this week's parsha. Yaakov is telling Yaakov is telling Yehuda that you are going to continue the legacy of royalty until the coming of Shiloh, until the coming of Mashiach. So again, that's another place of Mashiach's coming. The question is now, what can we do and how can we get together to make Mashiach come? What's the trick? How can we get there? The question is not only how can we get there, the question is, what is that we can do in order to, first of all, survive the difficulties which apparently are being presented before the coming of Mashiach? And it's expected. The Talmud talks about the era before the coming of Mashiach as the pain of a woman who is giving birth. There is aches and pains, and this is the natural procession which leads to the birth of a new baby, a new era. And throughout the ages, whenever Jews went through different calamities and challenges, they always looked at it as another stage in the birth pain, which will lead to the ultimate joyous coming of Mashiach. That's how we look at it. But obviously, we have to survive it. You can't just be quarantined all day till the rest of wait for Mashiach to come. That's the last thing anybody, I believe, wants to do, to be locked up and to say, I'm going to wait, and we know how discouraging it is. So there's a famous story, a Hasidic story of the Rebbe of Ruzhin, Rabbi Yisrael of Ruzhin. He was a grandson of the Maggid of Mezrich. His mother was the daughter of the Maggid's son, Avraham Malach. And the Rebbe of Ruzhin once met one of his followers. And he was complaining. He said, Rebbe, how am I going to go through this difficult time? This is then, 300 years ago, 250 years ago. So he told them, I will give you a secret. The secret is actually in the verse which we read before about Yaakov assembling his children. And let's go back to that verse. And he says to him, let's back on chapter 19, verse 1. Vayikro Yaakov el Bonov, the Rebbe of Ruzhin said. Yaakov calls his son, Vayomer. And he says to them, Asfu. Asfu means assemble yourselves. This word, assemble yourself, is the call that Yaakov is letting his children know what is going to keep them safe and secure in going through the challenges of the final stage of Golus, of exile. The secret is to assemble yourself, to try to be unified and united as a people. He told his chassid, you should get together with friends and share stories about tzaddikim, stories about our history, talk, fabring, and ve'agido. He said agido is like the Hebrew word megadim. Megadim means sweet. Gather together, and that's going to sweeten up is asher yikra eschem. Ikra is here translated that which will befall you. But ikra, the shoresh of ikra is the word kar. What does kar mean in Hebrew? Cold. So if you know, and if you want to know how you're going to deal with the coldness of the final days, not what will befall you in the final days. Asher yikra eschem. How are you going to survive that which will make you cold and freezing be'achris hayomim in the final day, but it's going to be so cold. We can't even imagine how cold it is when we are not able to be together and not able to join. So he says, you will know what you should do. You should figure out whatever way possible to get together and to gather and to assemble and to talk to each other and to be friendly to each other. That is going to get you the ability to go through these challenges. If you want to do it through Zoom, design to Zoom. If you want to do it by getting vaccinated and able to securely meet with other people, get the vaccine and join other people so you can sit next to them and live life, because this is the only way you are going to be able to survive these challenges of goals. This is the secret. Eosfu. You must be together. The worst is to be alone. To be alone. I always say that the only thing that the Torah says not good is not when it comes to eat shrimps, and not when it comes to steal money, and not when it comes to speak Lashon Hara. The Torah doesn't say it's not good. Could be that shrimps is good. I never tasted it, and I hope never to taste it. Could be speaking Lashon Hara is good. I can't tell you I never tasted it, but, could be it's good. But it's forbidden. I know it's forbidden. The only thing the Torah uses the term not good is regarding Adam. When he's created and Hashem looks at him and he says, Lo tov eyot Adam levado. It is not good for man to be alone. He needs people. Gave him a wife, the wife gave him kids, Sigivon Fleilach, right? It became, even which our sages tell us, acquire a friend, appoint yourself a guide, a teacher, a rabbi. Whatever it is, it's not only because you need someone to direct you in life and guide you in life. It's the very fact that you have someone to share with life. And sharing is in the nature of the human being. And when you are trying to prevent it from happening, then it breaks out in all kinds of situations which, God forbid, we don't want to even know or hear about. We all know in here tragedies. People are not, God forbid, attempting all kinds of things in life which no one should ever wish themselves that. And a big part of it usually is because they were not together with others. They escaped here and escaped there, and always try to be suspicious. Who knows, the other person is after my money and after my beauty and after my who knows what. No one is after you. Relax. Nobody is after you. Calm down. Try to be with people. Eosfu. Otherwise, it doesn't work. There's no other solution to it. And if you don't have it in your own needs, you try to find it, to search for it, and also create it. Don't come and say, no one invited me for Shabbos. You have a house. You know how to cook a piece of fish. Go to the store, buy a piece of fish, and call your friend and say, come join me. I made a fish for me and for you. What's the big deal? Why does it always have to be, that's it, I'm giving up because I wasn't invited? Who says you have to be invited? Maybe I should be invited by you. It's not big things. It's very small things, but it's all motivated and inspired by this very important, critical requirement, which Yaakov tells his kid, as the Rebbe Avruzhin says, hey, Osfu, assemble, come on, Kinderlach. No more sitting home alone. Hey, Osfu, come together. Ve'agido, megadim, it's going to be sweet for you. Lochem, it's going to be sweet to you. And that's going to give you the koach, the strength, to overcome the coldness, the car, which is going to befall you in the last days of Golus. In the olden days, before the final days, people were naturally together. You lived in a small shtetl. You lived in a very populated, what they call the Jewish neighborhood. We all knew each other. We all ran after each other. We were joining parties together. And that's how life went. I'm sorry. The shtetl is long gone. The Cossacks already threw us out of the shtetl. There's no shtetl. One is in Woodenville, and the one is in Linwood, and the one is in Tacoma, and the one is in Issaquah. Even in Bellevue, you can live in the same neighborhood. This is here, and there is there, and nobody sees each other. Busy, busy, busy. Everybody is busy, busy. Fine. If that's what it is, now you have to put more effort. We must put more effort. This is not something we can expect to happen. We must. Yes, there are people which maybe have to have a greater responsibility because they are community leaders. They have maybe to pay more attention to others, not to be alone. But it's not really only their job. Everybody has to try to find himself the ability. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a religious activity. It can be a singing group, and it can be a dancing group, and it can be a library, what do you call it, a book club, and it can be a movie, and it can be a sampling of wine, it can be a hike, it can be a walk, it can be all kind of things. It doesn't have to be expensive either. But it is critically required. Critically. I'm saying it, and some people on the Zoom over here know what I'm talking about. It is critically required in order to be able to go through this last stage and the last step before we're going to all merit to see the end of days and the day which we all believe. That's a part of our belief. Ani mamin, b'emunah shlema, b'bias HaMashiach, we say, I believe in the coming of Mashiach. I'm waiting for his coming. There's something which we can't ever give up. But at the same time, you know, there's the famous Hasidic Russian song that I'm waiting to get to the krechme. Krechme is like the bar, which I'm going to get a drink. But what's going to happen until you get to the krechme? I need a drink on the way. You know, once I'm going to get there is one thing. But on the way to the krechme, you also want to make sure you don't dry up. We are on the way to the krechme. We are on the way to the Geula, God willing, on the way to Mirza Hashem, to see. We never gave up. We always keep on saying, Lashana Abba Yerushalayim. We say it at Yom Kippur, we say it at Pesach, we say it at weddings. We keep on saying, I will never forget you, and we are not forgetting. And at the same time, this is the story. Yaakov shares an important message, and two messages. Number one is we can make Mashiach come faster. Don't wait for the day to happen. And this is simple by every single good deed and every single good word, and even a good thought makes Mashiach come sooner. That's number one. And number two, simply for our own well-being and for the way of surviving these difficult times. We must find ways. We must. There's no way. There's no way. There's no solution. There's no way. We got to do it. So Hashem should help us to find the courage to be able to be like that, to live like that. And the main thing, it shouldn't take too long, but we should marry the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days. Amen. Thank you. And now please unmute yourself if you want to share something so we can be together for a little bit. I don't like this whole muting thing. Okay,